Greetings, friends and family. It's yours truly, Shigema Vima, and I'm back with another video today. I'm away from home, so you can tell with the sort of makeshift arrangement I have going for here, but it will have to work, right? But the video I have for you today discusses a very fascinating moment in contemporary global geopolitics, and that is there is a gang crisis in Haiti in which up to upwards of 80% of Port-au-Prince, the capital city of Haiti, is currently under siege by gangs. It's pretty much under the control of gangs. And the UN has gotten together and put together a multinational security response team mission, MSS. And that is being led by, would you believe it, the fantastic East African nation of Kenya. Kenya? How does Kenya end up over there? It's not a superpower. It's not a neighbor to Haiti. It's not, I don't know if it's known. We'll find that out as we do this video. If it's known for its gang intervention, right? Are they experts in that? So that's what we'll be talking about today. Without further ado, let's get right into the video. I hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you so much. One.
The bandits came and showed no mercy. Eliamis Jean, a 32-year-old resident of Solino neighborhood, told the New Humanitarian. A woman in her 30s and another 8 months pregnant were shot dead in my area. Many houses were looted and burned. Jean now lives in a displaced camp with the youngest of her 3 children. She said she has seen no difference since the Kenyans landed. I heard there were Kenyans in the country. But where are they? She asked. Why are they in Haiti if we don't see any difference? So that's an article taken from January 2025, right? Earlier this year, from the New Humanitarian. Right? That's a quote from the New Humanitarian. In October 2023, the United Nations Security Council authorized the Multinational Security Support, or MSS, mission to assist Haiti in combating escalating gang violence. Right. And the country that was tasked with leading this multinational security support was Kenya. Kenya. Now, when I first heard the news, I had to rewind that bit. Kenya? Kenya? Right? Ruto, Kenya? Marathon runners and Nairobi, Kenya? With all due respect, I love Kenya. Shout out to all my Kenyan people here. But you see where I'm going with this. Now, my befuddlement at it being Kenya taking the reins isn't shade. Far from it. But historically, I have found that such interventions are conducted by one of 4 types of entities, typically, right? 1, a superpower, right? So you see that the US getting involved in places. China has done some of this work before. In the past, there's been places like the Soviet Union, right? You might get the former colonial powers still as sort of a superpower, so France, Great Britain has been involved in things as well, depending on the region. That's one. B, a neighboring country, right? So typically somebody from within the region. So you might expect, in this case, it's somebody like the US is a neighbor to Haiti. But it could also be the Dominican Republic, which shares an island with Haiti. Fraught histories be damned. You could have a regional power, maybe like a Cuba or something, right? Something in North America or even South America, which is in the region. Most often a supranational organization. So not unlike in this situation, right? A supranational organization. I'm talking about the United Nations, the African Union, EU, these sort of organizations, NATO even, should they be relevant. However, the biggest contributors in those, or the leaders, are often A or B, right? So you might get a US-led coalition, a French-led coalition, and so forth. Finally, there are countries that are super experts in a particular field, right? You might see Cuban doctors doing the Lord's work around the world. This is one of those global geopolitics most endearing and enduring quirks, as it were. You might see we've seen the South African firefighters flying out to California to help out with the forest fires over there. So Kenya, as far as we know, is none of those things. It's not a global power, though definitely putting in work on becoming a regional power on the continent. There's a good case for them being the East African hegemony, especially given Ethiopia's recent troubles. That's something that we'll talk about later. It's certainly not a neighbor, right, to Haiti. It's not even on the same continent. Obviously not a supranational organization, though the initiative falls under the auspices of one. Finally, I haven't heard much about Kenya being renowned for its gang task force. But perhaps this is something we will find out together as we do this exercise. I'm going to talk about this situation in 5 critical parts. 1, introduce the current situation. 2, why is Haiti like this? How did it get here? The long durée of that conversation. 3, we'll introduce Kenya's history of international involvement. 4, why are they there? Why is Kenya in this position? Then we'll round off by talking about how things are going in Haiti and what some other considerations there might be. So let's cook. In recent years, Haiti has faced a deepening crisis marked by rampant gang violence, political instability, and a humanitarian emergency. Right. So following the 2021 assassination of President Jovenel Moise, right, you all remember that, the Haitian government has struggled to maintain control, with gangs seizing large parts of the capital, Port-au-Prince. The Haitian National Police, under-resourced and overwhelmed, have been unable to counter the escalating violence, which has led to thousands of deaths and the displacement of over 1 million people. Right. From the Voice of America here, last year, nearly 1 million people in Haiti fled their homes due to gang violence, a figure that the French news agency Agence France-Presse reports as 3 times higher than the previous year. 1 million. Now, Haiti is not even that big a country. Let's quickly check here what the population of Haiti is. 11.6 million. So if 1 million people have been displaced, that's 10% of the population. And one of my favorite YouTubers here, Justin Hunt, the company man who does hip hop content, always says that 5% of anything is a lot, is statistically significant, right? So let me quick speak on these gangs. Who are they and what do they want? One of the biggest ones out there is the G9 family and allies, right? Or stylized as G9 and Famille et Alliés. This federation of gangs is led by Jimmy Cherizier, a former police officer known as Barbecue. G9 controls large portions of Port-au-Prince and has been involved in various violent activities, including blockades and confrontation with rival gangs. So this is the big one here, and we'll talk a little more about this guy here. And NPR recently interviewed Cherizier, or Barbecue, and in this interview he argues that the gangs are fighting against the rich who have exploited Haiti. So sort of positing himself as a pseudo Robin Hood figure, right? So he says they're fighting against the rich who have exploited Haiti. However, that's not how it's played out. The gangs are extorting poor people, women are getting raped, houses have been burnt. And when he's confronted about this, right, Barbecue, he goes, everything you say right now is true. But all of the extortion and all of the mistreatment is because the government allowed these things to happen. Essentially, he said, the government and Haitian elites have allowed this situation to happen, to create chaos and to remain in power. So he is accusing the government of deliberately tanking the economy that they can sort of disenfranchise the populace and remain rich themselves, right? Remain wealthy themselves. He also had a message for Washington, for the U.S. He said that the U.S. government carried some responsibility for the situation in Haiti, for not letting Haiti decide their own future for themselves. Right. What is he talking about? Well, the U.S. and the Association of Caribbean Nations, known as CARICOM, and other regional powers helped establish the 9-member Transitional Council to pave way for the elections after the assassination of Moise. The US called the installation of the council a critical step towards free and fair elections. But in Barbecue's view, the Transitional Council is not the will of the Haitian people. This is what Washington wants, and this is what they have imposed. And we will see shortly here that this is not the first time that Washington or the US has. But that's one group, the G9. The second is G-Prep, led by Gabriel Jean-Pierre, also known as T. Gabriel. G9 and G-Prep have been rivals for years, battling for control of neighborhoods in Port-au-Prince. Both groups have been accused of mass killings and sexual violence in areas under their authority. But Cherizier, Barbecue, has said that the two groups reached a pact last year dubbed Vive Ensemble, or Live Together in Haitian Creole, to cooperate and oust Henri, the Prime Minister. I said Henri because that's how the French pronounce Henry, but I'm not sure if that's how this guy pronounces his name. But bear with me. We are not sure how much this dynamic will last, said Mariano de Alba, a senior advisor at the International Crisis Group. But they formed a joint alliance in September 2023, basically trying to respond to the possibility that a multinational security mission was going to be deployed in Haiti. So they wanted to prevent that. So how far back does this crisis go? Is this just a recent thing stemming out of the assassination of Moise? Most experts trace the phenomenon back to the era of Haiti's former president Francois Papa Doc Duvalier and his son Jean-Claude Baby Doc Duvalier, whose combined dictatorship lasted 29 years, from 1967 to 1981. I believe Papa Doc had 15 of those years and Baby Doc had 14 of those years. The Duvaliers established and used a paramilitary group, the widely feared Tonton Macoutes, to stamp out any opposition to their rule. This brigade killed and tortured thousands of people. So when Robert Fatton, who is a Haiti expert and professor at the University of Virginia, is asked about this, says armed gangs are not a new phenomenon in Haiti. And I quote here, "They've been a part of the history of this country for a very long time," he told Al Jazeera. So this is taken from Al Jazeera. But Fatton explained that the armed groups in Haiti today are different. They have better weapons than before. They have reached a new level of sophistication in their attacks, Fatton noted. For example, they're using drones, right? Drones were reportedly used when gunmen stormed 2 Port-au-Prince prisons in early March, part of the latest round of violence. Fatton also explained that the armed groups were, until fairly recently, beholden to politicians, sort of in keeping in that tradition that Papa Doc started, and businessmen. Those individuals could control them, quote unquote, Fatton said. But this is no longer the case. This is no longer the case. And in some ways it gives credence to what Barbecue was saying, right? That for a long time the gangs were just the tools of the rich and influential. But now that they've broken away from those guys, now they're becoming a problem. Not so much because of course they're escalating the violence and the poor people continue to suffer here. But the outcry coming from the government officials and other wealthier people is not so much because of the crisis itself, but it's because now they don't control it anymore. But even then, if we take it back to Papa Doc, this is what Fatton goes on to say. They are a force unto themselves. That means that they can essentially dictate to certain politicians, or to many politicians as it were, what they ought to do or what they can do. But even then, Papa Doc doesn't just emerge in a vacuum, right? So let's do a quick but deep dive on how Haiti is this nation. Despite its majestic history of resistance, natural beauty, and communal values of its people, how has it ended up not only this gang-ravaged nation, but also the poorest nation in the Northern Hemisphere? And even if it was in Africa, would still be among the bottom 40% of the poorest nations, behind countries like Sao Tome and Principe, tiny island, Zimbabwe, which has been beleaguered by socioeconomic crisis for the past 25 years, Benin, right? So allow me, what gives? Allow me to attempt to answer that question by way of half a dozen or so critical historical moments. Critical historical moments. And the first moment is something that we've already alluded to, right? Is the Haitian Revolution that took place between 1791 and 1804, when Dessalines, who we've mentioned before, declared it independent. But the movement itself had started with the likes of Dirty Bookman, who was a maroon from Jamaica who had escaped, and sort of voodoo priest who got the people going. Then the likes of Toussaint Louverture really led a lot of the fighting and so forth. In fact, this has been detailed in some good, in a great book, which I will put on the screen here, Fear of a Black Republic, Haiti and the Birth of Black Internationalism in the United States by Leslie M. Alexander. Now, the Haitian Revolution is the only successful slave revolt in the modern era, or in the era of the transatlantic slave trade, which led to the birth of an independent, the first Black republic in the world, and the first post-colonial state in Latin America and the Caribbean. So indeed, this is very revolutionary and inspiring. It's a reference point for many people fighting for independence and better, particularly within that Pan-African community. But it also triggered global isolation, especially by slave-holding powers, the US, France, Spain, etc. Why is that? Well, if you think about that, this is the era of the slave trade itself is coming to an end, but slavery itself continues, right? It's going to be in the US at this point for another 6 decades. In all these places, there's still versions of it. Spain, in particular, is bothered because it borders, Haiti is right there with Cuba and other and other spaces like that are Spanish, that are Spanish ruled, right? The US is also right there. The British, they also have islands, Bahamas, and all these places. Why am I talking about all this? The idea here is this: that for them to start engaging with Haiti as if it was another independent nation, even though it's a neighbor, who would have empowered, right? Who would have empowered, or would have been seen as validating or empowering slave revolts, which the enslaving the imperial powers had no interest in. And I will read a little bit from the book I mentioned earlier here, Fear of a Black Republic. Senator John Berrien of Georgia, of the U.S., provocatively asked his colleagues, "Can the people of the South permit the intercourse which would result from establishing relations of any sort with Haiti? Is the emancipated slave, his hands yet reeking in the blood of his murdered master, to be admitted into their ports to spread the doctrine of insurrection and to strengthen and invigorate them by exhibiting in his own person an example of successful revolt?" Similarly, Senator Thomas Hart Benton of Missouri affirmed that the U.S.'s commercial relationship with Haiti, but argued strongly against extending diplomatic recognition because it would be an implicit endorsement of slave rebellion and black equality. After all, U.S. policy toward Haiti had been fixed for many years. "We trade with her," he explained, "but no diplomatic relations have been established between us. So yeah, you're only good for the money," right? So it wasn't until 1862, right, under Lincoln, when the U.S. formally recognized Haiti, along with Liberia. Now remember, Liberia had been an American project from the beginning, but it still wasn't recognized as a sovereign nation. But that's a topic for another day. As a sovereign nation, this recognition also reflected changing attitudes towards race and slavery as the Civil War progressed. But France in particular wasn't done. So the Haitian Revolution is one. The second point I want to make is French quote-unquote independence debt. France forced Haiti to pay the equivalent of 100, no, sorry, not the equivalent of, they actually forced them to pay 150 million francs, which was later reduced to 90 million, in reparations for the loss of its colony and enslaved people. So that much money is a modern day, how much do you think that would be in modern day money? It's $20 billion. $20 billion. Now, $20 billion is a lot of money by any measure. Any measure. Any measure. Right? But I'll add this extra dimension to it. Guess what Haiti's gross domestic product for 2023 was? It was $19 billion. The entire country in the modern era, the GDP was $19 million. They were dealt a debt of $20 billion. And what was the crime? For fighting for their independence and freeing enslaved people. Right, so I'm gonna go back to our book here, Fear of a Black Republic. It's not the only book that I'll be reading from, I promise, but it's really good. After more than 20 years of aggravation, King Charles X concluded that France needed to permanently resolve its relationship with Haiti. Based on the previous negotiations with Alexandre Pétion, Charles X decided to demand an indemnity, a monetary payment that compensated France for the loss of its former colony. Following an assessment of Haiti's land and physical assets, including the 500,000 formerly enslaved citizens, the declared value amount to 250 million gold francs, which, like we said, would equate to an estimated $20 billion. When Baron de Machaut disembarked and met with Haitian leaders, he presented the royal ordinance that demanded payment in annual installments. In exchange, the French government agreed to acknowledge the full and entire independence of Haiti, which they strategically and disrespectfully referred to as the French part of the island of Saint Domingo. While this primary stipulation required 150 million gold francs has been widely discussed and criticized, only a few scholars, including historian Julia Garfield, have analyzed the ordinance's other provision, which awarded France's most favored nation status and carried significant financial consequences. France was only required to pay half the amount of import and export duties paid by other nations, an arrangement that substantially compromised Haiti's trade profit. Woo! They're just getting started, right? A lot has been lost in the revolution, and they're nations need their friends. You know what I mean? Need friends, at least friends, They don't have any friends, right? They're the first black republic in the world, their first post-colonial nation in the world, and everybody who's around them has it in for them, not just in a look the other way type, but France is actively punishing them. So Haiti actually had to borrow money from French banks to pay it. A loop of crippling debt that drained the economy for over a century. Devastated Haiti's development trajectory from the jump. So we've seen something in the 1700s, in the 1800s. The third thing I'll talk about here is the U.S. occupation of Haiti between 1915 and 1934. What's happening in 1915? Well, the First World War has just started, and the U.S. by now has become some version of the superpower that it is today, but it's still early days. It just recently became that at the tail end of the 19th century. Germany is doing its thing, right? It's a rival, as it were, as the war would play out. But Germany was really seeking to assert itself around the world, right? Particularly in the Caribbean, sort of compromise the US's authority, or even really its other rivals, right? The UK and Great Britain and France are also still in the region. It's really trying to assert itself. So after political chaos and foreign fears of German influence, the US invaded and occupied Haiti for 19 years. This was, in many ways, was keeping in line with the Monroe Doctrine of the 19th century, which wanted to make, the basics of the Monroe Doctrine is that the U.S. tells the European powers that, look, the Americas, that's our house. You guys don't get involved in that. We'll assert ourselves however we need to maintain control of this. But this is now our house. It's no longer yours. It's ours. So the U.S. got in there. They centralized power, rewrote the Constitution, and built some infrastructure, but also suppressed dissent and entrenched in inequality. I'm going back to our book here. As it turned out, during most of the 20th century, it's been the Americans, not the French, who repeatedly reshaped the political landscape in Haiti. The reason they say instead of the French, because of that colonial relationship. In 1914, following the outbreak of World War I, the U.S. government became increasingly obsessed with Haiti and using the burgeoning global conflict to justify intervention, eventually seized control of Haiti politically and economically, arguing that Germany presented a significant threat to peace and safety in the region. President Woodrow Wilson resurrected the nearly 100-year-old Monroe Doctrine to justify sending military troops to invade the Black Republic. Haiti suffered from chronic instability, U.S. political leaders asserted, and therefore the U.S. must act to prevent Germany's incursion into sovereign American territory. Right? So this is the context that Haiti is too close to the U.S., and because of their instability, they pose a threat. Now, this is very interesting, because why would it just be Haiti? Why wouldn't the U.S. do that with Cuba and these other places, and the Dominican Republic and Jamaica and other islands as well? Well, other Caribbean territories were either too stable at the time, right? Too colonial. By too colonial, I mean, right, if you are still a British colony, for example, then the British have your back in that case, as you see with places like Jamaica. You're part of the British Empire. If you're part of the French Empire, the same. But because Haiti was independent, it didn't have a big homie, so to speak, quote unquote, right? So it was not only where other countries were stable or had a big homie, they didn't have that, right? Other territories like Puerto Rico were already in the hands of the U.S., so that wasn't a problem, right? And interestingly, to bring it back to our topic for today, one of the Kenyan security experts, George Musamali, when asked about how this was going, he says, this type of intervention has been tried since 1915, right? The Americans started and left without achieving anything. The UN was here with 17,000 strong Brazilian military forces who also left. It is a totally impossible mission. So, right, the Kenyans have not gone into this blindly. You can tell they've done their history, so they know even back in 1915 that the U.S. was here. And what that did with the U.S. taking off and intervening, then eventually leaving in the 1930s when Roosevelt comes in and puts in place the good neighbor policy, they had already laid the groundwork for the suspension of rule of law and yielding to strongman rule, right? So this is another corrupting force. The fourth one we'll talk about today, which we've already mentioned, was the rise of Francois, Papa Doc, and Baby Doc, right? Who ran that brutal dictatorship for those 29 years. Right, 29 years from 1957 to 1986. Was that 29? 1957. Yeah, right. With Papa Doc having the first 15 years. They used the Tonton Macoute militia to enforce loyalty through violence. They were also backed by the West as a Cold War bulwark despite these abuses, right? So again, the West getting its hands in there, right? Also, remember Cold War politics, right? Where if anybody was anti-communist, even if they were terrible, you see this with Mobutu Sese Seko in the DRC. You see this with DM in Vietnam. The West, the US, and other Western nations would typically support them. So what did this do? It decimated civil society and entrenched fear, right? Left no strong institutions when Papa Doc and Baby Doc, eventually when Baby Doc was removed from power. Okay. Number 5. let's talk a little bit. This was supposed to be a turning moment, right? The first democratic election. The first democratic elections in Haitian history came in 1990. That's 200 years, right, since the revolution. In which Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who was a populist former priest, won by a landslide in 1991. In 1990, sorry. The following year, he was ousted by a coup, right? Remember, the civil society has been dissipated by Baby Doc and then before him. So even though he won, he was ousted by a coup in 1991. He was reinstated in 1994 though, with the U.S. military backing. Then again ousted in 2004 amid claims of misrule and pressure from elites and foreign actors. So what did this do? The democracy that they tried to establish in the 1990s proved fragile, and foreign influence remained the order of the day. That's number 5. Number 6, bringing it more to the modern era right now. You may remember this, and this is the first thing on this list that I remember. I was born, of course, when the first democratic election happened. Definitely was kind of becoming more aware when he was removed, when Aristide was removed from power in 2004. But the first thing that I can say I actively engaged with, I was a senior in college at this time, was the 2010 earthquake. I remember as part of a student body that and do some community service and things. We used to pack up these boxes that were being delivered over there to an organization called Raise of Hope for Haiti. Shout out if anybody, I don't know if they're still around, but if anybody from there is watching this, you guys were doing amazing work. But this is in the 2010 Haitian earthquake, which was a catastrophic quake that killed over 200,000 people, displaced millions, and leveled the capital city, Port-au-Prince. Think about that. This country is already the poorest nation in the Northern Hemisphere, right? With all that history, the political and social instability. Then this earthquake hits them, right? And it doesn't hit the rural areas, right? Not that, wishing the people in the rural areas ill or anything like that, but typically a lot of those places may be less densely populated, but also less developed in terms of whatever infrastructure there is, right? So there's also, in terms of infrastructural damage, less. But this was centered in Port-au-Prince, the capital city, right? Billions were pledged in aid, but much of it was mismanaged or bypassed Haitian institutions. I remember my man Wyclef Jean, the artist, right, from the Fugees. He got into a little bit of trouble because his institution or his non-profit Yele was accused of such. Something else that was crazy that I had to do a double check as I was researching for this was the UN also introduced cholera, killing thousands more. For a moment when I saw that note, I just thought like the summary I was reading had it wrong. Then I dug in, and this is from NPR. In the fall of 2000, months after a devastating earthquake struck Haiti, a new disaster began. A cholera outbreak that killed thousands of people and continues to sicken people across the country to this day. Experts determined that the source of the disease was a UN peacekeeping camp, and now, 6 years later, so this is from 2016, sorry. Now, nearly 6 years later, the United Nations has admitted it played some role in the deadly outbreak. Think about that. There are people who've been sent to help are introducing deadly diseases in the aftermath. I mean, they're not doing it intentionally, but sloppy work, right? I remember at the time as well, in addition to the work that I was volunteering with the Raise of Hope for Haiti, I was interning with the American Red Cross as a senior in college. And I remember one of the, so I was looking really into this. And one of the problems that folks had run into was a lot of tents had been sent over to Haiti, but it just wasn't tents that could stand in that, So anyway, international disaster reaction can be messy at times, and this was definitely the case here. But talk about another impact of that, right, is that not only did people die here, It is also a large part of why China and Russia have not been keen to involve themselves this time around. China and Russia's opposition to the Security Council was based on an ugly, though in part true, narrative about how the past UN missions led to the death of these thousands of people from cholera. The impact of this was Haiti's recovery became a symbol of global aid dysfunction. Then number 7 is something we've already mentioned. That's the 2021 assassination of Jovenel Moise, the president. This is very recent, so I remember how that all played out, right? Now we're living in this fast-paced era in which we hear and see everything go on. So, I remember hearing of how he was screaming out, right, to try and get that help, and these guards, it was a mercenary thing. Read up on it. I'm not gonna go into it too much here, but just know the impact of it, right? He was assassinated by a group that included Colombian mercenaries and many Haitian Americans as well. Haiti descended into further instability, right? No elections, a power vacuum, and gang dominance exploded. This is one of the things that Barbecue from earlier was talking about, that there was this transitional committee put in place, which many Haitians, either in good faith or just opportunistically speaking, like Barbecue, cited as a violation, right, an unwanted intervention by the U.S. So this removed the last vestige of elected authority and hastened the collapse. And this has led us to the path that we are on today. So that was 7. But for what it matters, just to make it a nice round figure, 8. Beginning in 2023, Kenya began leading the Multinational Security Mission, as we've already been talking about. Amid worsening gang control and pleas from Haiti, the UN approved a mission led by Kenya, backed financially and diplomatically by the US. And the impact this has had is signaling a shift in global peacekeeping dynamics and Haiti's desperation for external support amid institutional breakdown. And if you remember that woman at the beginning who was saying, where are the Kenyans? Why are they here if we don't see them? And you think it's like 800, right? 800 Kenyans who are there. That's a group that you very well may not see. Right? 800 is so few people given the level of this crisis. And that's even if we're talking about them being trained and up to the task in that way, right? Or resourced. More importantly, they may be trained but resourced in any significant way. We'll talk about that later. But okay, so that's Haiti. I suspect many of you already knew the basics of this. But what of Kenya? How did this East African country, the Shangri-La of the Indian Ocean coastline, right? The home of the Maasai and the Kikuyu and Ngugi, R.I.P. Ngugi. How did it get to be a part of this? Perhaps a good place to start with that would be with Kenya's colonial history. Now, in so doing, I'm not implying that Kenyan history begins with colonialism. No place colonial history, right? And when I do that, I'm also not just creating a straight line from the colonial history to the contemporary times as if there's been no disruptors, most importantly, the end of the colonial era. But I'm going somewhere with this. So Kenya was colonized famously by the British, right, as part of British East Africa initially, right? And this British East Africa region includes modern-day Kenya, Uganda, and some informal inclusion of Zanzibar and bits of Somaliland, right? Indeed. Now, beginning in 1895, before becoming Kenya colony in 1920, right? So it was a British colony that whole time. Importantly, though, in 1902, the British Empire creates what is known as the King's African Rifles. What are the King's African Rifles, Shingimavima? I hear you asking. Well, the King's African Rifles were a multi-battalion colonial regiment, which was active from 1902, right? So this is very early days of the British East Africa, right? 7 years into the colonization of Kenya, as it were. 1902 to 1960, mostly recruited in British East Africa and other territories in the region, right? And it went on to play key roles in World War One, World War Two, and colonial policing, right? So in World War Two, for example, we can talk about the Battle of Madagascar, in which they were a prominent force in, or when the Italians invaded Ethiopia, right? So that battle in the World War II conflicts that happened in the Horn of Africa, the King's African Rifles were also there. They even made it out to Burma, right? They even made it out to Burma, where they were fighting against the Japanese over there. So the King's African Rifles were very much a force to reckon with. In fact, if you've read Ngugi, I was talking about Ngugi wa Thiong'o earlier. If you've read books like Weep Not Child and my personal favorite, A Grain of Wheat, in A Grain of Wheat, there's characters like General R. In particular, General R and Koinandu. But I don't think Koinandu was in the King's African Rifles, but definitely General R. His backstory was having fought in Burma in World War II. So what you tend to find, ultimately 200,000 or so Africans represented the King's African Rifles during its era, right? About 30,000 in World War One, about 100,000, up to 100,000 who fought in World War II. Why am I talking about this particular group, and especially if I'm talking about it in the context of colonial era Kenya, right? So of those numbers that I just mentioned, typically the majority, 40 to 50%, would be from Kenya, mainly the Kikuyu, Kamba, Luo. Another 20 to 30% would be from Uganda, Baganda, Acholi. The Nyasa land, which is modern day Malawi, would make up 15 to 20%. Then a few from Zanzibar, Somaliland, modern day Tanganyika, Tanzania, sorry. So why does that matter? Well, they were doing all this around the world, right? But in 1963, the King's African Rifles would last until 1960, when the conversations around independence would begin. And by 1963, when Kenya got its independence, and the independent state of Kenya began Africanizing its military, it created the Kenyan Defense Forces, and many King's African Rifle soldiers were absorbed, retrained, and promoted, right? But with a new national ideology. Remember, the point of the King's African Rifles was to advance the British Empire and as a tool of imperial control, which is why after the World Wars, their most important role was the colonial policing, to make sure that the Mau Mau is put down, to make sure that any forms of resistance and dissent are put down. That's what their purpose was, right? But after independence, as the Kenyan Defense Forces were Africanized, then institution, ranks, and drills of the KDF, Kenyan Defense Forces, could trace their structure and training lineage to the King's African Rifles. But the mission and loyalties and leadership all underwent a critical, radical shift from serving the empire to serving this new African Republic. So, while other post-colonial armies were plagued with coups, Kenya's military has remained remarkably apolitical and professional, a legacy partially of its KAR foundation. Right? So we will talk about this later, and we'll come back to that relative stability of Kenya a little bit later, because it's very fascinating. So in the 21st century, Kenya has gone from strength to strength as a regional mediation force, beginning with the signing of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement Act on January 9, 2005, effectively ending the Second Sudanese Civil War. The mediation was conducted under the auspices of the Intergovernmental Authority Development, IGAD, with Kenya serving as the lead facilitator, right? And the IGAD is a regional bloc with members like Ethiopia, Uganda, Sudan, Kenya, of course, Somalia, right? So Kenya is already emerging as sort of this exceptional space. By 1997, that IGAD had formally adopted the Declaration of Principles that became the framework for peace talks and that would culminate, of course, in the CPA, the Comprehensive Peace Agreement of 2005. Why Kenya? Well, why Kenya emerged as the leader at the time in the 1990s, right? So again, if you're surprised about Kenya emerging as the leader of this moment in the 2020s, it's very important to think what was distinguishing them even within the region back in the 1990s. Well, one, Kenya has diplomatic credibility, right? There's a reputation for relative stability in the region, no coups, no major civil wars post-independence. If you know, civil wars across Africa post-independence are a dime a dozen, right? You would be hard pressed to find a space that wasn't affected by a civil war. Right now we're talking about Sudan, of course, but the Congo, we know about the wars in the Congo. In fact, Congo has never really known stability for the past, 100 or so, since before the days of King Leopold. Zimbabwe had Gukura Hundi. Even South Africa itself, it had that on that verge of in the 1990s. But Angola, Sierra Leone, Liberia, you'll stop me when I start lying. Ethiopia, Somalia, of course, we know Somalia is a mess. Nigeria had the Biafra War. So many places, right? But Kenya is not one of those places. No coups, no major civil wars post-independence. It also had some experience in regional diplomacy, including mediating smaller disputes. The second reason is also Kenya, in particular, had a direct interest in Sudan's stability, right? A lot of the Sudanese refugees end up in Kenya, and the civil war spilled over borders via arms flow and displaced people. Which became so not only are they better positioned than others to get into this, they are also have a stake in this. Finally, the other countries just agreed, the IGAD countries just agreed that Kenya was neutral enough, unlike Uganda or Ethiopia, who were seen as having vested interest in the Sudan conflict. So by the late 1990s, they were leading that. Thereafter, Kenya has played roles in other things, right, including the African Union mission in Somalia, known as AMISOM, which was formed in 2007 to support Somalia's transitional federal government against insurgents. Uganda and Burundi were the first to deploy troops, indeed, but Kenya supported politically and logistically, like allowing overland supply routes and hosting Somali politicians in Nairobi. But initially, they didn't actually send combat troops, right? Unlike with the IGAD, where they took the lead with AMISOM in Somalia, they actually sat back with Uganda and Burundi being the first to deploy troops. Kenya's direct combat role came in 2011 when Kenya unilaterally invaded southern Somalia in Operation Linda and Chi. This was separate. They were doing their own thing from AMISOM. It was a national decision in response to cross-border kidnappings and Al-Shabaab attacks in Kenya. In June 2012, Kenya formally integrated its forces into AMISOM. This move gave its Somalia mission regional and international legitimacy, as opposed to just being an invasion as it had been earlier. More recently, Kenya has also been in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where they brokered peace talks in Nairobi in 2023 between the DRC government and the M23 rebels. All right, Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta, who is not the president now, but he was doing this in his post-independence as an envoy, as a regional envoy for the East African community, was able to help facilitate this. And in 2022, Kenya sent troops to Eastern DRC as part of an EAC regional force to help stabilize the area. So all this to say, Kenya has been pretty involved in recent. They have really been. We may not have heard of them, but they are really doing their thing, in international policing here. But why? But when this thing is presented in the UN and Kenya emerges as the leader of the Multinational Security Support mission (MSS) mission in Haiti, what do they want? Well, Kenya volunteered to lead this mission, right, marking a significant step up in its international peacekeeping effort from what we were just talking about. Kenya's decision was influenced by its experience in those peacekeeping missions which we just spoke about, and a desire to enhance its global standing. The US and other nations supported this initiative, with the US pledging substantial financial aid and designating Kenya as a major non-NATO ally to bolster the mission's legitimacy and effectiveness. So Kenya wasn't just going out on a limb here; they had that support. We can break down the reasons for Kenya's involvement into two broad camps: the opportunistic and the altruistic. And I know I'm being very simplistic when I say that, right? Opportunistic. A lot of times you can be opportunistic in your altruism. You can be altruistic in your opportunism. But I just want to, sort of create this dichotomy between what is, inherently for when they are playing the realpolitik game and when they are being good for goodness sake, right? And we'll talk about that. So let's start with talking about some of the opportunistic reasons. First of all, number one, U.S. and global approval. The U.S. pushed hard for someone to lead the mission without them putting their boots on the ground themselves. America does that sometimes. Kenya stepped up, and in return, it received that financial backing we were talking about. They get international praise, kudos. Like, for example, this video. They also get a bump in stature, as I spoke about being named a major non-NATO ally by the US. That's a very big deal, right? Similarly, they are also, number two, this increases their soft power and global brand building. And Kenya is really trying to position itself as the diplomatic leader of Africa, right? Rivaling Nigeria and South Africa. Those are the big boys. South Africa. North Africa, that argument will probably go to Egypt, where the military is routinely ranked as Africa's largest. The economy is pretty diverse and pretty big. Big player in the African Union as well as in the Middle East and the Eastern Mediterranean. And, it's Egypt, right? It goes way back to, the history of Egypt is just induces this fear. South Africa, I spoke about already, a member of the BRICS nations. The economy is quite possibly the most industrialized and diversified on the continent. The economic inequality is through the roof, but I've spoken about that before. In fact, watch my other videos. In fact, my previous videos were about South Africa. Long-winded way of saying that Kenya is also really going for that, to be counted among the elites of the nation, at least to be the dominant force in East Africa, if not to be counted among the Nigerias and the Nigerias and South Africas and Egypt across the continent. Indeed. The third part is, again, the military police export model, right? Which is to say Kenya has a growing profile in training and exporting security forces. This mission could open doors for future UN contracts, training programs, and prestige, particularly if it goes well, which it doesn't seem like it's been going that well, right? But the flip side of that is those are the opportunistic reasons. The altruistic reasons, and again, I use altruistic very loosely here, is that Kenya probably identifies with Haiti in shared colonial histories. Kenya and Haiti both bear the legacy of colonial violence, external exploitation, and political instability. From that perspective, Kenya is stepping up for a fellow black majority post-colonial nation in crisis that could be framed as Pan-Africanism in action. Secondly, here, African leadership in global crisis, which is to say African nations for a long time have often been on the receiving end of peacekeeping and other sort of global philanthropic efforts, and this flips that script, right? As Africa, this idea of the African Renaissance venturing into the 21st century becomes more of a reality. Kenya's participation in this way can also be read as claiming space on the world stage, saying that Africa isn't just a beneficiary, it's a stabilizer, a helper, a leader. We are here too, right? This Afropolitan space that I've spoken about before. Then thirdly is this idea of symbolic restoration, and it ties closely with the first point I made on this list, right? Haiti, which is the first black republic, has long been a symbol of resistance and black liberation. In fact, you can see this across the literature. Right now I'm going to read a section from A History of the Pan-African Revolt by Trinidadian scholar C.L.R. James, the original of which came out in 1938. and expanded in 1969. So it's definitely closer to 100 years old now. But in that book, CLR James writes of Haiti, and he says this: "It is impossible in this space to deal with the slave trade and slavery. The same consideration has made it necessary to omit accounts of the early revolts in the West Indies and the incessant guerrilla warfare carried out in all the islands by the Maroons or runaway slaves against the former masters." So what he's doing here is just saying that, he's not going to write about everything. Remember what I was talking about, how there were other slave revolts earlier on. He's saying he's leaving that out. "Negroes have continually revolted, and once in Dutch Guyana, the revolting slaves had almost the entire colony for months. But in the 18th century, the greatest colony in the West Indies was French San Domingo, now Haiti, and there took place the most famous of all Negro revolts. It forms a useful starting point for the conversation on Pan-African revolt." That's CLR James in the history of the Pan-African revolt. I'm now looking at another book here by Ezedebe P. Olisanuche Edebe of Nigeria, called Pan-Africanism, the Idea and the Movement, 1776 to 1991, in which here he's writing about a specific figure. I might have mentioned him already in this video. I'm recording this over a couple of days, so I can't remember everything that I've said already, but he is writing about Benito Sylvan, who's a Haitian cat, who he describes, and I quote here: "Finally, we must cast a glance at the Haitian propagandist, scholar, and diplomat, Benito Sylvan, 1868 to 1915. He is important not because of any novel ideas he propounded. His ideas were essentially those of his contemporaries, but because he is an interesting personality who deserves to be better known. In his book Du sort des indigènes dans les colonies d'exploitation," in French, his titles are given as Officier de la Marine Haitienne, Office of the Haitian Marines, and so forth. But anyway, he's a big deal. The only reason I'm reading his name is it deserves to be mentioned right up there with the Henry Sylvester Williams and the W.E.B. Du Bois as other formative figures in Pan-Africanism. All this to say, Haiti is a very important space in the Pan-African history, and Kenya may also be having that on their mind. Some Kenyan voices have referenced this symbolic tie, this Pan-African tie, that helping Haiti is like repaying a historical debt to a nation that lit a flame for global black freedom. And speaking of this Pan-Africanism thing, there's a very interesting thing that, in fact, my advisor for my PhD, Dr. Rita Kiki Edozie, has written about in her book called The African Union's Africa. And that's this fact that in 2006, the African Union established what is known as the sixth region and of the African Union. That is to say, there are 5 regions on the continent, right? North, South, West, East, and Central. The 6th region is the diaspora. This clause, and I'm quoting here from her book, which gives African people, communities, and countries born in the African diaspora formal AU membership, and this indicates to the world that the African world occupies more than a continent. And I quote again: "The Pan-African world through which the AU navigates to govern is territorially expanded from the continent throughout the globe." Right now, so this was established in 2006, and in 2012, Haiti, who appeared to be the diaspora nation that has pursued this opportunity the most, was granted observer status on the AU, not full membership, but observer status. This status allowed Haiti to participate in the AU meetings and foster closer ties with African nations. Building on this relationship, Haiti sought to upgrade its status to that of an associate member, aiming for deeper integration and collaboration. However, in 2016, the AU clarified that, according to Article 29.1 of its Constitutive Act, Only African states are eligible for full membership. As a result, Haiti's bid for associate membership was not approved, and it continues to hold observer status. Why am I sharing all that? Just to say that Haiti has indeed been looking for a closer relationship with Africa, right? It's probably just based on the size of its economy, the prominence of African descended things culturally, sociopolitically in Haiti, maybe aligns themselves closer to the African nations, right? And they're looking to connect with them in that way. But there's been these barriers here. But be that as it may, you can see that the intention is there, and maybe Kenya has also been responding to that. So where does this leave us with this conversation? I pulled up a couple articles as I was rounding up just to see where we're at with this. And this is from Reuters from May 12th. And it tells the story, right, that it hasn't been going well. But on May 12th, the top diplomats from Kenya and the Dominican Republic met in Santo Domingo, right, in Haiti, in the Dominican Republic, on Monday, and called on the international community to fulfill and expand its promised funding for the UN-backed security mission in neighboring Haiti. Why is this important? Well, according to Reuters again, Dominican Foreign Minister Roberto Alvarez and his Kenyan counterpart Musalia Mudavadi warned that the MSS mission in Haiti is struggling to fight the country's worsening gang violence, effectively due to a lack of funding and logistical support. Kenya deployed officers to the MSS in June 2024, as we've been talking about, right? The mission includes around 1,000 personnel, with 800 of them being from Kenya. In the first 3 months of 2025 alone, 1,600 people were killed in Haiti and more than 1 million people were displaced. This is according to the UN. Both ministers acknowledged the mission had been unable to be more effective due to the lack of financial and material resources necessary for the full and complete deployment of the troops stationed there. According to an official statement, they urged the international community to fulfill the contributions offered and even increase them so that the mission can fully operate. So when we talk about those quotes that I've read earlier with the woman in the beginning say, "Where are the Kenyans?" right? Or the quote about how the Kenyan guy who was saying that, even the US did this in 1915. This is all pointing to the struggles that people are having here. And I'll read from one more publication here, and this is the Foreign Policy magazine, right? FP online. And I'm quoting here. After more than this came out just like a couple days ago, June 3rd. After more than 2 years of fighting against the gangs that have laid siege to the country, the Haitian government has resorted to hiring private military contractors. Blackwater founder Eric Prince is reportedly sending up to 150 former military officers to assist the government in re-establishing security. A former UN peacekeeping mission would have drawn from the UN dues to pay for the projected $600 million task. It also would have fielded the traditional UN blue helmets to re-establish the necessary security that would allow humanitarian and development assistance to save lives and rebuild the country. Instead, in October 2023, the US forced diplomats to seek voluntary contributions. Right, this is how we end up where we are here. But the UN Trust Fund only raised $110 million in voluntary contributions. So a far cry, less than a quarter from what was being required, including $15 million from the US, which also contributed $300 million to a parallel funding material and originally pledged $100 million. $63 million from Canada, and a paltry $8 million from France, given its history with Haiti, right? Though France did commit $2 million more to other funds for Haiti. Earlier this year, the Trump administration grudgingly followed through on the financial commitment to the mission held over its predecessor. A Security Council voting on renewing the MSS mission is scheduled for October, and U.S. support, now uncertain because of the Trump administration, is key. Meanwhile, unable to draw on the formal organization of the UN peacekeeping forces, the MSS is forced to rely on ad hoc commitments from different countries to supply resources and boots on the ground. Originally, Kenya agreed to supply 1,000 police officers with promises of other contributions from West African and Central American countries, as well as CARICOM, the Caribbean community. Today, there are just 800 Kenyan officers, not soldiers, in Haiti, outgunned and outmanned by brutal Haitian gangs. The presence of these police officers is broadly welcome, but mostly locked down in their Port-au-Prince barracks, they are not yet backed by sufficient boots on the ground from Central America, the Caribbean, and African partners. Again, to that woman screaming, "Where are the Kenyans?" Brazil, Argentina, and Chile, which had once supplied UN troops under a past peacekeeping mission, have avoided stepping up to commit funds or troops. In the case China and Russia, I've already spoken about. There is a slight hope that their passive stance may be beginning to change, because in a meeting of Latin America and Caribbean states with China in May, the final declaration committed attendees to find a resolution to Haiti's security and development crisis. If you remember, I spoke about Haiti early, about China and Russia being upset about how the UN had ended up propagating cholera after the earthquake of 2010. These are some of the frustrations that Haiti has today. It is also worth mentioning here that Benin, the tiny West African country of Benin, which had offered the largest contingent of up to 2,000 soldiers, put its deployment on hold last September, arguing that Haiti's situation demanded a military solution and that its soldiers would not take orders from a police force. Meanwhile, 6 Bahamian, from Bahamas, military officers sent to Port-au-Prince as an advance team, out of the deployment of 150 more, received an authorization for voluntary withdrawal from their government, meaning they can leave if they feel unsafe. No one is going to be put in harm's way, the Bahamian foreign minister says. The government of Barbados also disengaged from its commitment to send troops and announced earlier this month that it would limit its support to technical assistance. So what do we have here, right? We have a very precarious case built over a couple centuries of instability, of corruption, external involvement, and in internal corruption and incompetence that has led to Haiti. Then, of course, the hand of nature, as we see with the earthquake, that have all combined to put Haiti on a very precarious path. And this, for all of Kenya's good intentions, whether opportunistic or altruistic in stepping up to this role, there's very little that they can do. I would argue that even if it was a 1,000 American officers, right? Remember, these aren't soldiers, officers who are well trained in the war against drugs and war against gangs in the U.S. and are as equipped as Americans tend to be out there. That would still be an almost impossible task. And you can see here, by the way, these other nations are reacting, even the big ones, right? The U.S. didn't want boots on the ground there, right? China and Russia are apprehensive. Neighboring countries like Barbados and Bahamas, who had made some commitments, are like, you know what, maybe we'll back away. So it's very precarious. Haiti continues to be a fascinating place to watch. I offer no prescriptions here, just to bring in the information, and I hope you guys at least found this video interesting. And let me know what you think about this whole thing, and if you're staying up to date with it in the comments section, as well as be sure to share and subscribe with anybody you might think is interested in this sort of thing. I've been Shingima Vima, and this has been Pan-African Conversations, Haiti and Kenya 1.